Hey everybody, Jem Schofield here and welcome to the Canon EOS C100 video tutorial series. In this video I'm going to be talking about how to build up the Canon EOS C100. One of the things that you'll notice is that it's incredibly small, very compact. It's definitely an evolution from the DSLR cameras, but it also borrows very heavily from the Cinema EOS line. In fact, this camera system has the same sensor as the Canon EOS C300 and the Canon EOS C500. A great compact camera system, great for single operators, and the first thing we want to do when we build this camera system up is we want to put this thing on here, which is called the grip unit. Now what we do is we just go ahead and take this and we attach it to the side of the camera. We want to make sure we have a completely positive connection, push that all the way in, and then it's fully adjustable here in different positions, and once it's fully in position you can pick it up and you'll see how easy it is to hold the camera system. Got that grip unit there, your left hand is going to just naturally fall underneath the camera. And this thing has a few different functions. You can see here that it's got a start, stop, record button here. There's a dial here, which you're going to use to change aperture. And then if I turn this over here onto the back, we have a joystick for navigating our menu systems, and then an assignable button, which by default is for magnification. So now that we've done that, what we need to do is we need to get a battery in this thing. So we'll just go ahead and pop a battery into the camera. We'll get a lens on here. So we'll just take the body cap off. This is the 40mm STM lens. It's an EF lens, so it'll have a red mark on it. So when we take that and we attach it to the camera, we just want to make sure that we line up that red mark with the red mark on the camera body. Clockwise turn, and then we've got that attached to the camera. Now once you have that on here, we don't have a built-in microphone here. We have to have an audio input. So what I would suggest is if you want to keep in the smallest configuration, we can take a mic like this. This is the Rode Video Mic Pro, and we can just put that right onto the hot shoe. And then on the side of the camera here, we have a microphone terminal, which has a little mini jack. I'm just going to go ahead and insert that mic in there. And this is a very small configuration when you're using the camera. Now what we want to do is we'll take this microphone off and we're going to talk about the handle unit. Okay, so I've attached the 17-55 EFS lens, and we're now going to take this, which is called the handle unit, and attach it to the camera. And what we're going to do is just attach that the same way we did that little Video Mic Pro to the hot shoe, but it actually has a 1/4-20 screw on here, and we can just tighten that down. So we get a very tight connection, and then we take this cable to the external terminal on the side of the camera. We're going to line up those two arrows and push it in, and when we hear that click we have a positive connection. And then let me just show you a couple of things about the handle unit. On the top here we have a 1/4-20 female thread, so that's a mounting point. We have another shoe here, so that's another mounting point. We have start, stop, record. And then over here we can actually attach a shotgun mic, which we'll do right now. So I'll just unscrew this. Okay, open that up. Got a shotgun mic here, so we'll attach that. Okay, great. And then you'll see on the side of this unit here we have a channel 1 input for an XLR and a channel 2. We'll take the shotgun mic and we'll attach it to channel 1. And then maybe in a standard configuration we'd have a shotgun in channel 1, and then we'd have a lavalier in channel 2. So we'll just go ahead and open up the protective cover for the audio controls, and you'll see here they are. We see an A over here for channel 1 and an A for channel 2. That's for automatic gain control. If we want to manually control the microphone, then what we can do is we can change this from A for automatic gain control to M for manual. And now when we want to actually control our levels for this, if we just go ahead and rotate the handle unit, you can see here are our levels, and we can control them now with the dial. That dial will have no effect at all if you're on A for automatic gain control. So make sure you're on M if you need that. And also depending on the type of microphone that you have. If you're using the external microphone, the first thing you'll want to do here at the bottom is you want to switch it from internal to external. If it is on internal, it's going to be using the built-in stereo mic, which is part of the handle unit. If it's on external, it will be capturing the audio from the XLR input. I'm still on internal on channel 2, so at the moment I'm going to be recording audio from the stereo mic on channel 2, and from the shotgun mic on channel 1. Last thing to take a look at here is depending on your input. If you have line level, which is used for certain types of inputs, you would put it on line. For microphones like lavalier systems, wireless lavs, you would have it on just mic. But if you do have a microphone that needs external power, then you would switch it to 48 volts. Okay, so great. Now we're going to close the protective cover here, which is going to protect the dials and all of those things so you don't bump them when you're shooting. If we now turn the camera system around, we're still in a very compact configuration here. If I turn on the camera system right over here, you can see that on the side of the camera that we have the camera position on. We can even lock it if we want to. And then I can just open up that LCD screen and position it in a bunch of different ways. This articulating screen is very versatile for different shooting styles and positions. And of course, if you have an image stabilized lens, you can turn that on and it will make shooting handheld really, really easy. So a great way to build up the camera. And then what we can do is we can take a look at some of these external ports here on the camera system. So let me just go ahead and turn this off and we'll take a look at these right now. Okay, so we've built up this camera a little bit differently now, and we're going to talk about the terminals on the back of the EOS C100. We've got a headphone terminal here. We've got a remote terminal for third-party remote solutions. We'll just flip this up here, and we've got a USB terminal, and we have an HDMI out terminal, and then down here we have the DC in terminal. Okay, so we've got a full HDMI out giving us an 8-bit uncompressed 422 signal. How do we use this with the camera system? We've got a full HDMI to full HDMI cable here. I'm going to plug that into the camera. We'll turn this on. I'm going to turn on an external monitor here, and I'm just going to go ahead and plug that in, and we'll see that we'll get a picture that will come up in a second on there. And this is a pretty typical configuration when you're shooting with the camera. So you can see here that we now have picture being pushed to here. But another way that we can use that, and let me just go ahead and turn off this monitor, is we can use an external recorder. This is the AJA Key Pro Mini, and this is the Atomos Ninja 2. Both of these recorders have HDMI inputs, and both of them will recognize the signal and can record from the EOS C100. And we'll actually be covering that in another video, but we basically just plug that in. Now we're using this full HDMI out to record externally, and in fact we can do it simultaneously to the internal SD cards and to a recorder like this. So as you can see, if we take a look at this camera system as a whole, even fully built out with a shotgun mic and a 7-inch monitor, it's still very, very small in terms of size. Very, very cool. So that's building your camera system. In the next video, we're going to talk about setting up the C100 for shooting. Hey everybody, Jem Schofield here, and welcome to the Canon EOS C100 video tutorial series. In this video, it's all about shooting with the Canon C100, so let's get started. Okay, so I'm in the hot seat now, and we're in a pretty typical interview style setup, 3-point lighting, and we've got Peter now behind the main production camera. And we're going to talk about one of the first things that we like to do when we're on a set before the client even shows up, which is make sure that our white balance is correct. And there's a couple of places to get to that on the C100. I'm actually going to have you pan the camera so everybody can see this. There's a button on the side of the camera, WB for white balance. You press that, and then if you look at the display, you'll see that that is highlighted, and you can cycle through those. Another way that you can get to this, which is really my preferred method on the camera, is with the grip unit attached. You press the joystick in. You can then cycle going up and down through the different white balance settings. We can see our auto white balance, we can see our custom white balance, we can see manual white balance, and then there are also a couple of presets in there for incandescent lighting, which would be tungsten, basically 3200 Kelvin, and then also for outdoor shooting, daylight around 5400 Kelvin. So let's actually go back to auto white balance and talk about that for just a second. And auto white balance can be a convenient way to just quickly get a good looking picture on your camera. But the problem with it is as things are coming in and out of frame, the camera will constantly try to white balance to those objects. So for me, I think that a couple of better ways to do this, to use the other features in there. Let's go ahead and cycle through and go, because we're using tungsten light now, and we'll use the incandescent option there, which is about 3200 Kelvin. Though our lighting is a slightly warmer than 3200, so it may come out a little bit cool depending on what you're shooting with. Now when we're outside, we could use the daylight preset and see how that looks as a starting point, or we could cycle through, and let's go ahead and do a manual white balance. You'll see a K for Kelvin temperature, and on this camera we can adjust our Kelvin anywhere from 2000 to 15,000 Kelvin. So in this situation we're at about 3500 Kelvin. Let's go ahead and warm that up a little bit. As we increase the Kelvin temperature, it warms the image up and go to about a 38 or a 3900 Kelvin, and we can see how that looks on the camera. Let's go ahead and go to one of the custom white balance settings. There's an A and a B, and in order to do a custom white balance, you really need to have a white card, generally not a white piece of paper, but something like a true white card, and I have a couple of them here. And what you do is you take the camera and you will either, if you have a long lens, you can actually fill the frame with the white that is in front of the camera in the lighting that the subject is in, or you may have to pick up the camera and actually bring it closer to the subject to fill the frame. And then if you just pan the camera, Peter, for a second, we can take a look at that button on the side of the camera that you press. You press that button and it will actually do a custom white balance. So I think that's a pretty good overview of the white balance settings on the C100. The next thing we're going to do is take a look at how to quickly get to ISO or gain and also to aperture on the camera system. Okay, so one of my favorite ways to get to stuff on the C100 is by using the grip unit on the camera. And I'm actually going to have Peter go over and press the joystick, and if you just hit the right arrow and cycle through the options that we have there, you can see that we can cycle from white balance. We can go from white balance to our ISO or gain settings depending on how we have it set up in our menu system, and then we can also go and change our shutter very quickly. Let's go over to ISO right now because this is something you're going to be doing with the camera on a very, very regular basis, and let's increase the ISO to 5,000 just so that we can see a change there. Obviously it's going to be overexposed, and in order to get back to where we need to be, we'll have to change our aperture. Starting aperture was at 5.6 for the beginning of this video, and then we also had an ISO of 1250. So if we increase it to 5,000, that's 2 stops. We're obviously going to have to change our aperture, and we can do that by using the dial that's on the grip unit. Let's go ahead and open that back up to a 5.6, and we can drop our ISO down to 1250 again, and then we should be fine. Let's say, for instance, we were shooting an interview with somebody who moved around a lot. They were, very animated when they were doing things. Well, a 5.6 is a good starting point when you're shooting with a large sensor camera, standard interview setup, but we wanted to just make sure we had a little bit of a deeper depth of field. Let's go ahead and change our ISO to 2500, and that's a full stop difference. So now we're going to stop down the camera by a stop on aperture, so we go to an f8. And then now we get a little bit more leeway in terms of that subject being able to move around in the frame. Now I want to talk to you about some very special features on the C100, one-shot AF and push auto iris. Let's actually take a look at one-shot AF first. I'm going to have you pan the camera, and in order to use this feature on the camera system, you have to make sure that the AF is turned on your lens. So we're going to turn that on, and I should be out of focus right now, but there is a button at the front of the camera, the front left side of the camera, and you just hold that button in. You don't let go, and then all of a sudden that white box is going to turn green, and that means that you have critical focus. Let's go ahead and throw the lens out of focus again. We'll just take a look at that one more time. In fact, can you pan the camera over so we can see where that button is on the front there? You'll see that that's the one-shot AF button. And let's go ahead and pan back. We will hold down that button. You'll see the white box on the display, and then it'll settle in. And then as soon as it's green, you have critical focus. That's one-shot AF. So now let's take a look at the push auto iris feature. Actually, let's have you stop down the camera to, I don't know, an F11 or something like that, and pan the camera so everybody can see where this button is. It's on the side of the camera body, and we are now going to press that once we're on the subject and see that it will go ahead and adjust the iris for the exposure there. And of course, you know, this is used in conjunction with the light metering modes on the camera system, and you're going to adjust this to your taste. Sometimes you'll find that when you're using something like push auto iris that it's right where you want it to be, or you could use it as a starting point and then just reach over there and make a minor adjustment by 1/3 of a stop if you needed to, in order to get the exposure to where you wanted it to be for your shot. So now we're going to talk about the ND filters on the Canon EOS C100. Great feature, especially considering the size of this camera body. I mean, this little camera body here is so small, and we actually have 3 stages of ND when we're using the camera. But we basically have ND1, which is 2 stops of ND. We can go to the second stage, that is 4 stops of ND. And then we can go to the next stage, and that is 6 stops of ND. And then if we go and rotate it one more time, we go back to no ND at all. Now the purpose of ND, of course, is to cut the amount of light that is coming into the camera so that you can control your aperture. Most of the time we're using ND in exterior locations, so let's take a look at how we might use that outside, where there's so much light coming into the camera that even if you're shooting at an ISO of 850 on the camera system, you need to stop down, and you've got such a deep depth of field, and what you want to be able to do is you want to get a shallower depth of field. So before we get into reviewing clips with the C100, I want to talk a little bit more about shooting with the camera. Because of its size, because of its form factor, it's ideal for shooting just handheld. You put the grip unit on there, use IS lenses, and it's really, really comfortable to shoot that way. But it's also ideal because it's so lightweight and so compact to use with sliders, handheld rigs, shoulder-mounted rigs, jibs, and of course monopods and tripod systems. So in terms of reviewing your clips when you're using the C100, there's a couple of ways we can do that. If you want to keep the camera in the camera mode and you want to review the last clip that you shot, that's very easy to do. I'm going to actually have you pan the camera so everybody can see this, and there's a button on the back of the camera. You can press that and it will actually play back that clip. Now it's doing it without sound. It's letting you review picture, but you can actually see that last take in its entirety if you want, and that will give you an idea of what that take looked like. And if you're pushing that to a larger external monitor, you can make sure that your focus is tack sharp and that you don't have anything in terms of soft focus. But let's go ahead and now take a look at properly reviewing your clips, and you can dig into this a little bit more in the manual as well. Okay, so now we're going to take the C100 out of camera and we're going to select media. So I'm going to have you go to the side of the camera there and turn the dial, and there you are on media. It's going to reboot into the media mode of the camera system. So when you're out in the field and you want to go ahead and take a look at all of the clips that you've shot, or see a particular clip, not just the last one, you can use a joystick on the grip unit to navigate to the clips that you want to review, and then you can use the transport controls on the back of the camera. Now there's other functionality in the media mode of the camera system, and you can refer to the user's manual for that. So there you have it. That's an overview of shooting with the Canon EOS C100 camera system, both in this type of environment and out in the field. So easy to use, incredibly versatile camera system. Go out and shoot something and enjoy. Hey everybody, Jem Schofield here, and welcome to the Canon EOS C100 video tutorial series. In this video, we're going to be talking about setting up the camera and getting ready for shooting. So we're going to jump right into the menu systems. Let's get started. Okay, so the first thing you should know is that the 2 things that you're going to be using the most when you navigate the menu systems on the C100 are the menu button over here on the camera body and this on the grip unit, which is called the joystick. So we'll be using those in combination. I'm going to actually press the menu button now, and that's going to bring up the main menu system on the camera, and I'm going to go over here to the grip unit and I'm going to use the joystick. I'm going to go down 1 into the camera setup menu, and when we're in the camera setup menu, I'm going to just go through some of the key parameters in the camera system that you should be thinking about when you're setting this thing up. So light metering, most of the time we're going to leave that on standard as a setting, but if I press in on the joystick, we can see that there's backlight as an option if you're shooting a backlit scene. We also have spotlight, so that if you have something that's in frame that's being lit by a single light source, you may want to choose that. Standard is what you, again, would use in most situations. It's a center weighted that's going to be giving preference to the center of the frame. So we're going to go down here to ISO and gain. Now, depending on how you like to use a camera system, if you're used to measuring your camera sensitivity and you're coming from a standard video camcorder, maybe an ENG camera, we can set that to gain. If you're used to using a DSLR or a digital cinema camera or a cinema camera, then you'll use ISO. We're going to leave it on ISO for right now. ISO increment, we can set that to 1/3 of a stop or to full stop increments. We'll leave it on 1/3 so we can be more precise with our ISO. So the next menu item is iris. We're going to go into that and take a look at iris increment. We can actually set that to half stop, the default, which is 1/3 of a stop, or we can even choose on this camera something called fine. As you're changing your aperture on your lens using the little dial on the grip unit, it will actually do it in finer increments than 1/3 of a stop, though your readout on your LCD or on your EVF will actually be in 1/3 stop increments. So now we're going to go ahead and take a look at the shutter options. When we go into that menu, you will see that we have mode as our first parameter. When we go in there, there's a lot of options inside of here. I want to talk about the first three. Shutter speed may be something you're familiar with if you're coming from a DSLR background, and that's the default in terms of the way the camera's set. And I'm going to step out of the menu for a second and just show you on the main screen here, you'll see that we have shutter speed. And at the moment, I have that set to a 1/48. Now I'm shooting with the camera at 24 frames per second. And in order to get that film look, that thing that we associate with a cinematic look and feel, we like to expose each of our frames for exactly half the amount of time. So if we're shooting at 24 frames per second, we would lock that in at a 48th. If we were shooting at 30 frames per second, then we would change that to a 60th. Now, I'm going to go back in here to the menu and change this mode now to angle and step out of the menu. And when we look here, we'll now see that we have an angle reading for the shutter as opposed to a shutter speed. And if we wanted to expose each of the frames at 24 frames per second for half the time based on shutter angle, we basically have a 360-degree exposure. If it was 360, we would be exposing it for the whole time. So half of that time would be a 180-degree shutter angle. Most people who are coming from a cinema background will actually set up the camera to shutter angle as opposed to shutter speed. It's up to you how you want to set it up. But one advantage to using shutter angle is as you change your frame rates in your camera system, the shutter angle will stay the same. So if you're shooting at 30 frames per second, the shutter angle will stay at 180 degrees and it will expose each of your frames for half the amount of time. Now we're going to take a look at clear scan. This shutter mode will actually allow you to set the frequency in order to record CRT computer monitors so you don't see black bands or flicker on the screen, so that when you're shooting under certain lighting conditions and you're seeing flicker or you're seeing scan lines, you can dial in the camera very, very specifically so you can eliminate those things. There's also a flicker reduction feature, which when turned on will automatically detect and reduce flicker under certain shooting situations. Now, CP Cinema Locked. This is a mode inside of the camera system that if you turn it on, you will see a significant difference in terms of your image. It is based on the Canon log gamma curve, and it is a way to basically lock down your camera system into shooting a very, very flat picture that's very gradable in post-production. And it's an option that some people will like to use, especially when they're using a multi-camera situation and they want to take a whole bunch of cameras and very, very quickly match them. You can go in here and turn on Cinema Locked, and that will allow you to shoot with all of the cameras with all of the same locked settings. And then you can go in there and just make sure after that that you have the same frame rate, the same shutter, and those types of things, white balance, and then away you go. But remember, when you use that feature, this Cinema Locked mode, you are going to have to grade the picture in post-production, so it's not ideal when you want to go ahead and edit something and send it out to the world right away. So we've turned off CP Cinema Locked, and we're now going to go down to ABB, which stands for Automatic Black Balance. And we want to do this anytime we're shooting with the camera. Let's say you're taking out the camera for a shoot. You want to go ahead and do an ABB in the environment you're in. Anytime you're changing an environment, it's just a good idea to make sure that you do it. And what you'll need to do that is a body cap on the camera. And we're going to go ahead and attach that, and then we'll go into the menu, and it'll say attach a body cap, and then there's an OK. And we'll go over to OK and we'll activate that, and then it will cycle through a process where it's black balancing the camera system. Again, if you're doing a multi-camera shoot, you want to do this to each of your cameras. It's one of the first steps. It should be part of your checklist whenever you're using the camera to do an ABB. And if you're shooting on a long production day, let's say you're shooting for 8 or 9 hours, make sure that you do an ABB a couple of times during the day. And we'll go ahead and click OK. And then we're just going to cycle through here. I'm going to take a look at one other option in the camera setup menu, which is called peripheral illumination correction. There are going to be situations where you may have fall off in a frame. And if you see here, if I go into this menu, if you're using a Canon EF lens and it recognizes the lens, we can go in here and see that in this menu, and we can turn this feature on in the camera system. This is the EF 24-105 f4L IS lens, and we'll just turn that on, and now the camera will automatically compensate for that fall off or that peripheral illumination change inside of the camera, which is a great feature. So now we're going to jump into the audio setup menu, and we're going to go over to audio input. We'll jump in here, and we have at the moment the internal microphone on, which is here in the handle unit. And what we're going to do is take a look at these settings. The first one is a low cut setting, sometimes called a high pass filter. And what low cut does is it basically lets the high frequencies through, and then it basically lets some of the lower frequencies that are down there fall off so that you don't hear them. By default, it's off. If we go to LC or low cut 1, this is better for when you have low frequencies that might be getting in the way of people's voices when you're recording people's voices. LC2 is really when you're in windy conditions. You might be by a beach or by a building and you're hearing some things. But it can in fact get rid of some of the other frequencies there, so make sure you are monitoring your signal. We're going to set that back to off. Mic sensitivity, if you're not getting the levels that you want, you could go from normal to high. Not necessary in most situations, but there is an option for that. And then we have something called internal mic attenuation. So if you're using this feature with the built-in microphone that's part of the handle unit, it's going to attenuate that by 12 decibels. If you're using the external microphone, it's going to do an attenuation with your setting on mic, not on line level or plus 48, but on mic of a 20 decibel change. And then I'm going to scroll down here, and there's one other option I want to show you, which is called the limiter. There are situations where you're going to be recording audio and you're not going to know what's going to happen with the person or the talent that you're going to have on camera, and they may be a very, very dynamic speaker, so they may start off very softly and then they start to speak a little bit louder, and then they may start to speak very loudly when they get excited. A limiter is sort of your safety. When you turn it on, it creates a little ceiling because it's 0 on an audio meter. If we go above that, we clip our audio. So the limiter basically clamps down the audio when it starts to get near 0 to make sure that we don't have clipping in our signal. Okay, so we're going to jump in now. I've turned on this external shotgun microphone, and when we go into the audio input menu, you'll see that our parameters have changed. We're no longer seeing the options for the internal microphone. But just to show you guys, if I go over here on the side of the camera and I change one of my channels to internal, then those options for that handle unit's microphone will in fact light up, so we can actually make changes to that as well. At the moment, we want to just concentrate on an external microphone, so I'm going to scroll down here, and we can actually make some pretty specific decisions in terms of what we're doing. The first one here is XLR record channel. We can actually decide when we're recording. In this situation, we have one shotgun going into channel 1. Do we want that to record to just channel 1, or do we want it to record to both channels on the camera system? If we choose channel 1, channel 2, then it's going to lay down that audio to both channel 1 and channel 2. And if you're only using one microphone, then that may be something that you want to do. Then we go in here. We have mic trimming. This is going to give us the ability to change the decibel level of the microphone that we're using. And I can tell you from personal experience, this is something that I use very oftentimes when I'm using wireless microphone systems, where I have a wireless receiver that's plugged into one of the XLR inputs, and then I have a wireless transmitter, and I go in here and actually tweak that level here by using the mic trimming. Now over here, we have mic trimming for XLR2. And then we do have an attenuation option for XLR1 and XLR2, so we can actually activate that attenuation if we want. And that's an overview of the audio input features for the C100. All right, so we're going to take a look at this video setup menu very quickly here. This is important because if you are using an external monitor or an external recorder that has a display, you may want to actually see the characters show up. And in fact, just like any good cooking show, I have an external monitor here. And let me show you what the options are. So character display, if I change it to VF, that's only going to display in the viewfinder inside the camera system or on the LCD screen. But if I choose again external out, then it's going to push those menu items here to an external display. The other thing that you have to do is you have to turn on the on-screen display. And you'll see here it says HD on-screen display. If I turn that off, then it disappears. If I turn it on, then I'll actually see those in my signal. In setting up for shooting part 2, we're going to talk about time code, the other functions menu, and I'm going to introduce you to the custom picture menu on the C100. Hey everybody, Jem Schofield here, and welcome to the Canon EOS C100 video tutorial series. In this video, we're going to be talking about setting up the camera and getting ready for shooting. Let's get started. Okay, so now we're going to talk about time code on the EOS C100, and we need to do that in the time code user bit setup menu. If we go into time code here, we have a few options. At the moment, we have this set to record run, and record run will record consecutive time code based on the start and stop of your camera system. But there are two options when doing that. If we go up to mode and we choose regen, then regen will actually look at the time code off of your SD card and make sure that it's consecutively recording time code based on start-stop. So if you had an SD card that was in the camera system and it read 3 minutes on it, then it would look at this if it was set to regen, and it would make sure it started time code at 3 minutes when you press start on your camera system. If I go into preset, we can actually decide where the time code starts, and you'll see that down here in the setting area. So under setting, by default, that's set to 0. If you want to make sure that it's set to 0 because you're putting fresh cards in the camera and you're doing record run, you can just go over to reset, and regardless of what the time code is that reads here, if you press reset, it will make sure that it is set to 0 on the camera system. But we also have this other option in here, which is called free run. And free run is a continuous time code. It's not based on the start-stop of your camera system. You can set it to 0, but most of the time when we're using free run, we'll actually set it to the time of day. So we'll go down to setting here, and we will set it to the time of day. So we'll click set, and right now it is about 11:50 in the morning. So I'm going to go to 11:50. And then I go over here to set, and if you take a look up here in the top right, as soon as I press set, it will change that time code to the setting that I put in there. And now we are recording free run time code based on the time of day. Now, that's great when you're doing multi-camera shoots, so you've got 2 or 3 C100s. If you set them all to the same time of day into free run, if you're shooting an event or a concert or something like that, it's very easy to see when the camera operators were starting and stopping their cameras, and it really helps the editor in post-production. So now that we've taken a look at time code, we're going to jump out of that and we're going to take a look at the other functions menu. So the first thing we're going to do is take a look at the assign button function in here. So we're going to go down to assign button, and there are a number of buttons, 15 in all, on the camera body that can be assigned a function. All of these buttons that you see that have numbers on them are assignable, and there are a bunch right over here which are our transport controls, which are 1 through 6. Which I'm going to assign some of them to do certain jobs. What I want to do is go in here and select this. I'm going to choose number 1 and select it with the joystick, and then I'm going to, you can scroll up or down depending on what you're trying to get to, but I know that the option that I want, photo, is near the bottom of the list, so by scrolling up I can get to it faster, which is really cool. I like that on the camera. I'm going to choose photo, I'm going to select it, and now we've assigned taking a photograph to the number 1 button here on the transport controls. Now what I'm going to do is take buttons number 3 right here and buttons number 6 on the transport controls, and I'm going to assign them to the headphone plus and headphone minus options. I have headphones plugged into this headphone terminal almost all of the time when I'm shooting with this camera. And because it's so ideal as a, sort of single operator camera system, it's going to be great for you to be monitoring your audio in those situations, but you may want to adjust your headphone levels. So I'm going to scroll down here to number 3, and then I'm going to find Headphone Plus and assign that to, there it is, to number 3, and then I'm going to go down to number 6 and scroll down here, and I'm going to find Headphone Minus, and then we'll step out of this. I now have Headphone Plus, Headphone Minus, and then of course for button number 1, Photo. So now we're going to go ahead and take a look at the fan parameters in the camera system, and there's only 2 of them. There's automatic and on. When I turn it on, the fan will kick in on the camera system and it'll run continuously to keep the camera cool. If I change it to automatic, what will happen is the fan will immediately go off unless you're in a very, very hot environment, and it'll stay off unless it gets to critical levels in terms of heat. So if you're shooting an interview, definitely want to use automatic, especially in a closed environment, to make sure that you're not picking up that fan noise from the camera system. But if you're shooting MOS without sound, you're out in the field and things like that, where that's not an issue, especially in warmer climates, then it makes sense to have the camera fan on. So now we're going to go ahead and take a look at system frequency. So when we're talking about using the C100, if we want to use that camera system in an NTSC based country, or we're shooting for NTSC, then we would make sure that's set to 59.94. If we were in a PAL situation, we would change the camera to 50 Hertz. And when we do that, it's obviously going to change the frame rate options that we have on the camera system. So let's talk about our recording options with the camera system. Right here underneath the LCD, we have the SD card compartment cover. When we lift that up, we can access the 2 SD card slots here. And then we have to make sure that that's closed in order to record to the camera system. And there's a couple of ways that we can record here. At the moment, I have the camera set to double slot recording. And this is a great feature because with 2 cards inside of the camera system, if I look up here on the monitor, we'll see this D symbol here. That means that when I press record on the camera, it is recording the same data to both cards, so it creates a backup automatically when you're recording. Now, if I turn double slot recording off, I can go up to relay recording and I can activate that. By turning relay recording on, it will record to the first card, and then when that card fills up, it will go to the other card slot. You can decide which card you want to start with, but most of the time when we're recording, we would start with A and then we would go to B. I'm going to actually set this back now to double slot recording. It's one of the ways that I like to shoot with the camera, especially when recording to the SD cards with AVC HD. We get very, very long record times on SD cards. In fact, with the 32 gigabyte cards in here, I'm getting 174 minutes at the best quality on the camera. So double slot recording makes total sense because I always have a backup when I'm shooting in the field. I don't have to think about workflow until the end of the day. So let me go down here to the next menu option, another important one here, which is bit rate. The first option is 24 megabits per second LPCM, and this is the highest quality recording to the SD cards. It's 24 megabits per second. It is uncompressed audio, which is at 16-bit 48 kilohertz. That's the industry standard. In almost every situation when shooting with the camera system, this is what you would use. But we do have some other options. These other 3 options, 24, 17, and 7, all use Dolby Digital audio as a compressed format. And they are also, when you get down to 17 and 7 megabits per second, recording at a lower bit rate. Most situations you wouldn't do that because we get such long recording times on these SD cards. But for instance, if you were shooting, let's say, a legal deposition and you wanted to make sure you had very, very long recording times, you could set this to 17 or 7 megabits per second when image quality was not paramount, and you would get extremely long recording times with those lower bit rates on the camera. So we're going to step out now and we're going to go down to frame rate. Right now the camera's set to NTSC, so we're going to talk about those frame rates. They'll of course be different when you're shooting in PAL. And here we have 24p. This is the most common frame rate that people are going to shoot with if they want a true progressive recording at 23.98 or 23.976. We also have PF24 and PF30. these formats are really used when you want to shoot with a progressive look. And this would be, for instance, let's say PF24. You have a client and they don't want to go through a conversion process, and you're shooting for something that may be going to broadcast television. So you shoot PF24, you would hand off the files to them, they would have that in a 60i stream, and they could just go ahead and drop that into a timeline. Again, 24p for that cinematic look in most situations. And then if you have a client who is shooting for broadcast and they want a 60i or interlaced signal, we can choose 60i here on the camera system. We're going to scroll down and take a look at a couple of the other options. This one is really important to me. It's the custom function area. If I go in here, I can do some really cool stuff. And for me, where it is most applicable is for this button right here, which is our magnification button on the grip unit. And I am going to change my focus assist to black and white for when I magnify the camera system. So you'll see focus assist black and white, and then I'm going to go ahead and choose magnify. And then when I step out of my menu and I use this magnify button, my image will actually go to a black and white image as opposed to a color image, which is really great when you're trying to get critical focus, because your contrast tends to be a little bit better. I can also go in and say when I'm magnifying that I want to add something to the magnification, and I can choose either the peaking feature in the camera system or the edge monitor, which is also a great feature in here. I'm going to turn on peaking and press the magnify button again, and you'll see that now we're magnifying and peaking will be turned on. And of course, because I activated black and white, it'll be a black and white image with the peaking function in the camera. So that's really it in terms of the other functions menu and setting up your camera system. We're going to take a look at one more thing, which is choosing a custom picture profile to get you ready before you go shooting, and we'll do that right now. On the side of the C100, you'll see custom picture, this dedicated button. I'm going to press that, and as soon as we do that, we get the custom picture menu. So I want to talk about one particular custom picture, but I'll also give you just a quick overview of what's inside of here. We're going to scroll down to set, press the joystick in, and we have to change it from off to camera, and then select. And as soon as we select that, we can now cycle through the different custom pictures in the camera system. Right now I have the camera set to CP1. So we're going to scroll up here and take a look at a couple of these. So here we have EOS Standard, which is a custom picture on the C100 that closely matches what we have for the standard picture style on the EOS HD cameras. Then we'll scroll up here and we have a new custom picture, which is part of the EOS C100 called YDR, or Wide Dynamic Range. A really fantastic custom picture, because what it does is it allows you to shoot with a curve on the image that approximates Rec. 709. So whereas when we go up here to Cinema and we're using Canon log as our gamma curve, and we have to really think about a much flatter image which is going to have to be graded in post-production, when we use YDR, we're actually shooting with a curve that, while it has a lot of dynamic range, produces an image that once you've edited it, you don't really have to grade it if you don't want to, as long as your camera is properly exposed and white balance and things like that. So this is really a great way to shoot, and I'm actually going to lock that in right now as our custom picture. There's a whole bunch of other options that we have that we'll talk about in another video, and when I step out of the custom picture menu, on my display here you will see that it says CP8. CP8 is YDR, and so I know that I'm using that custom picture. So now that we've actually set up the camera system and it's ready for shooting, in the next video we're going to talk about actually shooting with the camera.